So for this part, we're going to be talking about drawing the head. Drawing the head, at least in my style, that I like to do. As you know, rectangle, right, for the head, and then you would apply the 3D to it as you need, depending on the angle that you're going to do. Apologies for the noise, there's a bit of construction ongoing. But yeah, let's go to the head. The important thing about the head is that you have your rectangle, right? But as you start to refine the rectangle part, of course you need to imagine your middle line, because this is where that guides you for the nose, middle line. And you also, if you imagine this middle horizontal line, so middle vertical line and middle horizontal line, the eyes would be located slightly above the middle horizontal line. So the eyes would be here, with the nose located a bit in the middle, more or less, of the post the middle horizontal line, and then the mouth here. So you can practice doing this. The thing with the head is that, of course, our head isn't necessarily a rectangle. It's a rectangle up till here, and then it becomes a bit of a triangle thing depending on how cheeky you are, right? So my recommendation is that you look at the rectangle, but then you start transitioning to doing this. So you would cut up this part, then you do the rectangle proper, and then you do a triangle here, bit of a triangle. So it can be more sharp or less sharp, depends on the needs of the character. And then I start to imagine my lines, right? I start to imagine my lines here, middle line, and then from here I draw my eyes. In the middle part of this quadrant here. And then I draw my nose, and then my mouth. And then I add the ears, and then I add the eyebrows. The ears are a bit like a croissant from this angle. Not a croissant, like a half a butterfly. Depends on the size of the ears, right? But yeah, this is how I approach making a head. A few things to keep in mind is that there's a skull underneath. So, and a few of the lines that stand out when it comes to the eye, to the face, are these lines here, because depending on how proeminent the facial structure of the bones is, you might be able to see this line here, which is the skull underneath, right? This part of the mandible. So, but this is usually the line that you see the most. And then there's also, for the temporal bone, not the temporal, the front piece of the cranium, this line over here, symmetric. So you don't need necessarily to go around memorizing the skeleton, but be aware that depending on the state of thinness of the character and how proeminent the bones are, you might be able to see just a bit of this line draw here. So for example, like so. So in this case, you see that I drew the cheekbone here and this temporal bone here. Highlighting that the character, the cheekbone is more prominent. It's a bit more visible, right? The character is, by the way, bald in this case. We're gonna talk about hair as well. But yeah, the key part to remember really is these lines that make up the middle of your character. And of course, as you apply 3D, they kind of follow along the shape. And then where the eyes are positioned in the middle part, the mouth, and also that you can have these lines here to indicate that either if the cheekbones are very visible or not, and same for here, right? This is looking from the front. If you have the opportunity, if you have the means, it doesn't hurt to perhaps acquiring a plastic skull. That can be useful as well to visualize that. But there's so many photos online of skulls that you can also search. And skull, I search on Google, and I'm just, there's these photos of skull all around the internet that I can just use to practice, because sometimes I forget as well. But yeah, you see here this line here. Yeah, you see here. Not sure. I'll put the photo on the video, but you see this part here. This part can be seen throughout the even when you add the muscle and the skin to the character. Usually this bone here is visible, and then for the cheekbone, it depends on how thin the character is. So you have a skeleton, a skull here, and then from there you can just, the eyes would be here. This is one way to look at it and how to approach it. But for the most part, I don't focus so much on the drawing of the skull underneath. Very rarely do I need to think about it. I just focus on a couple of key pieces. Like I said before, these two lines when considering the structure of the face. Now, one thing that I want to keep in mind, my recommendations: number one, for the nose; number two, for the eyes. First off, when I'm drawing the character facing up front, let's go back to my character. I don't usually draw, I don't do this, which is a common thing, where you draw this line, which is the bridge of the nose. I don't draw this, because for the most part, this bridge of the nose, this is just, of course, you can see them when in profile, but from the front, it's just a play on shadows. And I also don't, I try to refrain more for aesthetic purposes from drawing the nostrils. Most of the time I can do this, just a quick like this, just to draw the nostrils, but I do try to keep my number of lines minimum on the face. So because of that, I don't draw the bridge of the nose, and I keep the number of lines here on the nose part limited. Sometimes I just do this depending on the angle. Yeah, so I try to keep it minimal. Also in regards to the nostrils. Of course, if I'm drawing the character from this angle, I will have to draw the nostrils. Also, for the mouth. The mouth, for the most part, I draw a line here, which is this line. I don't draw the lips. No, I don't draw the lips for the most part. Because the lips, again, are also just a different color of the skin. Of course, you can draw the lips to emphasize shape when perhaps drawing at an angle. So like this. But from the front, I just stick with a simple line. And the simple line I can also adjust so that I do this middle part of the lip, and then like this. And one thing, I do usually draw 2 extra lines, which is this line here for this part, and then just to add a bit of volume here. If I'm gonna do shadows, if I'm gonna add some volume, I usually just add some shadows either by dragging my finger around the ink, or if I'm using a pencil, I'll just play around with shadows. But I really don't draw the lips. I don't draw this outer line of the lips. I just draw the opening and this part over here. So I try to keep it minimal. For the eyes, many ways to do this. If I'm drawing a small drawing, maybe on a small sketchbook, I'll just do like this line over here, and then I'll just draw the pupil like so. I keep some white here just for this part, but this is like the simplest way that I draw the eye, and maybe some eyelashes, nothing too crazy. Then I can go more realistic if I want. It all depends. I can draw this part. Maybe add some extra umph here. The thing is that I almost rarely also draw this line underneath the eye, this second line here, just for aesthetic purposes. It's rare that I draw it. Usually I focus on the line, on this line over here, and not so much on this line over here. It can also work. It depends on what you're going for, right? Depends on the style. So my recommendation is that you experiment with different strategies, different approaches to draw the eye. Because the eye is very important. If you think about it, the first thing that you're going to notice on a person probably is going to be the eyes. So I think that if you find a different way, if you brainstorm a bit on how can I make my characters look, I don't want to say attractive, but appealing to look at, it starts in the eyes. So with that, I do recommend that you experiment with different ways of drawing the eyes. shapes, forms, as well as the inside of the eyeball. How can I make perhaps something different? How can I make it interesting? Right now, I see that a very appealing way of drawing the eye that's taking a lot online is drawing this underline of the eye, and then also drawing it's the eyelid, and then going for a realistic tone here. Oh, sorry. I meant this line over here, drawing the undertone of the eye. And perhaps some lines here. You see sometimes occasionally this line is added as extra as well, because it is a line that we have. In my case, not so much. It's the upper eyelid. Multiple ways of drawing the eyes. You can just draw an eyeball as well, like this. Just there's the anime way of doing it, which is it's like you're drawing a door. The thing with drawing anime eyes is that you might need to adjust the proportions of the face to account for the bigger than normal eyes. So it means that this part over here might be a bit extended. So be careful with that, so that the anatomy looks good. And depending on also on the art, the eyeball can be very decorated, can be very flashy, right? I see a lot of artists that draw all of these effects inside the eyelid and the eye, inside the eye, for light refraction, whatever trick it's happening. Multiple ways of drawing the eye. For myself, these are my top 3. Just a simple line for the upper eyelid and the eyeball, and then some modifications, and I can add a line below as needed. But play around with the shape. The shape itself of the eye is a bit like it's like a fish, like this. But then you can just modify the shape as you need for the drawing that you want to do. Again, I'm focusing so much on the eye because it's very important. The eye is the first thing that people will look into your drawing of a character for the most part. If the character is the forefront of the drawing, right, it's going to be where people look at first. I just want to talk a bit about the side as well, because on the side is where you also start to see some things happening regarding to the nose. So on the sides, right, usually is you imagine your box, and then from your box you just do this, which is like a ball. So this will be the head from the side. The head is, if I break it down into a very simple shape, it's a bit like a ball from the side. And then I just add this thing over here. Keeping in mind that it extends a bit to this direction here. There's multiple ways of constructing the head, and you might see some flashy videos on Instagram that just overly complicate the process of drawing the head with so many lines. that I don't think it's necessary. I think this is as basic as you can get. This is good enough. And then you add just this for the nose. You see people drawing so many lines to account for the nose and the bridge and whatever, and just drawing this 300 balls for the nose, whatever. I don't think it's really necessary. I think just this shape for the side, perfect. And then you memorize a couple of lines. You memorize that it goes like this. So you have your forehead, then it has this part underneath for the eye, to account for the eye. So you have this first curve, then you have the nose, and then you have your mouth. This is probably the hardest one to practice. Probably the hardest one to practice. So the thing that you want to do is, you want to practice this. You grab a piece of paper and you go like this. And you repeat this process with different lengths until you feel comfortable. Because this part, the transition between the nose to the mouth, there's a lot of back and forths. So you want to do this, practice this transition both ways, both directions. You want to practice this transition multiple times. This one here, which is nose, then starts the lip. The upper lip usually sits on top of the lower lip. Then you have for the chin, perfect. And then of course you can on the side, like I just did here, this is where it makes more sense to consider the lips as three-dimensional and draw the full lips. Not draw the full lips, but draw just enough lines to convey that something is three-dimensional here, right? Yeah. Don't be focused on creating or drawing so many lines for the head. Focus on the basic shape. The head is like a big circle attached to a triangle that when looked at the front and on the side, it's the big shape is the rectangle. The key part really to make it natural is to focus on from the side being able to draw this, from the front being able to determine where the eyes are, establish your own style for drawing the eyes, and practicing as well. I forgot to mention that, practicing the symmetry of the eyes. And that on the symmetry is just a grind. You can start simple. And just do this as an exercise. This is a great exercise to grind out the symmetry in the eyes, and then you try to make them as symmetric as possible, and then from there you start applying to the full face as well. Yeah, eventually, as you get comfortable, then you also stop thinking so much about this full thing, and you start thinking with the hair, right? Because the hair then will add additional volume that you need to consider to the head. Like so. And we're going to be talking about the hair in a bit as well, because it's important as well. And the way how I approach hair when drawing in this more stylized manga style. But yeah, this is how I approach the head. Of course, I'm always guided by the principles of the rectangle. Rectangle is key, especially when I start applying different angles to the head. You see here that even though I drew the box, right, I'm not respecting it necessarily, because again, it's just a guide, placed there, a placeholder for just a placeholder. And again, I draw the cheekbones. And you remember we have spoke about the sternum, right? We spoke about the clavicule, the trapezius. These are the points that you need to memorize. And then the box acts as a guidance, acts as guidance for you to be able to draw in different perspectives as well. And then you just remember this part over here. You remember the part that we spoke about for the front of the face, where it's just a rectangle that you cut off, the triangle here for the chin, also cut off a bit here for the curvature of the cranium, and you are off to the races. You are off to the races. And then you practice on the side, which is difficult. Practice drawing this, especially the curvature for the nose and mouth transition, and also practicing symmetry for the eyes. And you are off to the races in terms of establish your own style for drawing the head with these principles. For the next video, we're going to be talking about the hair, also how I approach it as well. Just one more thing to highlight. This was something that I learned, I already knew about it, but I kind of learned the hard way, is that there was an event where I was drawing people live. It was one of those fancy events, and an older lady came to me and asked for a drawing. And I did the drawing as realistic as I could, adding the lines to account for the age of the person. You know, the lines here on the eyes, a bit of a line here as well. So this line over here, this line over here. And she hated the drawing because I added too many lines, which made the drawing similar to her appearance, but the drawing looked old because it was an older person. So the important tip to share here is that the bigger the number of lines that you add in the drawing, right, the more number of lines, the older the character will appear. So if you want a young character, try to minimize the number of lines that you're drawing. If you want an older character, then you start adding on the lines to account for expression lines and all in between. So this was a tip that I wanted to leave you with before I depart for the hair drawing video. Hope you liked it, and any questions, of course, drawing the head is a very complicated subject, but any questions, please feel free to send me a message and I'll be happy to assist. See you on the next video.